Hello and welcome to the DTP podcast for everything concerning social housing, from finance to regulation. I'm your host Stuart, and today we're discussing assets and liabilities registers, what they are and why they're an important requirement for registered providers of social housing. To help us unpick the requirements, we're joined by DTP Senior Consultant Marcus Evans. Welcome, Marcus.
Thanks, Stuart.
It's a pleasure to have you with us. By way of an introduction to the session, can you provide a brief summary of what an assets and liabilities register is?
Yes, thanks, Stuart. Essentially, an asset and liabilities register, or an ALR, as they're more commonly known, is a register which just does what it says on the tin, really, which is a register of providers of social housing related assets and liabilities. And it's a key regulatory requirement that providers hold an ALR. Whilst it's prescriptive around the need to hold one, there's no specific format for a register. It's up to the provider to determine how it's set out the required information. What's really important, though, is that it's accurate and up to date.
So just picking up on the point around the regulatory requirements, could you just unpick this in a bit more detail for our listeners?
Yes, of course. The requirement to hold an ALR comes from the governance and financial viability standards and the associated code of practice. The regulator requires providers to assess, manage, and where appropriate, address risks to ensure the long-term financial viability and therefore ensure social housing assets are protected. Providers have to ensure they have a register in place that clearly outlines all the assets and liabilities that could impact on social housing assets. When advising clients, I always like to link it to the phrase that often mentioned by the regulator, that providers and their boards must know their stock and understand their risks. For most providers, it's as simple as that, although further complexities arise where there's group structure in place. If a provider forms part of a group structure, irrespective of whether they're regulated or not, the group parent needs to be able to demonstrate a full understanding of all the intergroup liabilities. In these cases, this means they're required to include on the register any intra-group arrangements and service level agreements, so they can evidence that social housing assets are not put at risk as a result of these agreements.
Thanks for that, Marcus. It sounds like there are some key considerations for our listeners, depending on what type of structure they actually have in place.
Yes, that's right, Stuart. And it's always better to ask for advice or assistance if you're unsure.
Absolutely. So just moving on to some more of the detailed practicalities, what would you suggest are the key elements of content within an ALR? Can they differ?
In practice, all registers will be different as each organisation is unique. Although I'd highlight the following as the key elements that all registers should include: treasury management arrangements. By this I mean the details of financial arrangements, investments and cash management, and any charging arrangements. Key contracts. So any information about significant contracts, agreements and obligations, who they're with, how long they are and the value, for example. They could relate directly to the delivery of services to tenants or delivery of development activity, or any break clauses. In other words, where failure to meet a commitment or termination of an agreement would have a financial impact. And what would that impact be, for example? Penalty and termination clauses. Also title information, so the documentation that relates to property titles and including any restrictions placed on them. Any valuations in relation to assets. Not much explanation required here. Each provider will have their own form of valuation of assets. Stock condition, information on the condition of the housing stock. What this means in terms of future liabilities for the provider. Any loans that are in place, guarantees, indemnities or leases. Not forgetting, of course, those from the group companies. Lender covenants. Details of any covenants or conditions imposed by lenders. These should be separated out for each loan that's in place. Pension arrangements outlining the organisation's commitment to end liabilities, who the provider is, for example. And also any equipment, anything costing a significant value, individually or grouped, vehicle fleet, for example. There's usually a materiality limit set for ALRs. So all the elements I've mentioned will be subject to an appropriate limit. This will vary dependent upon the provider and its board.
Thanks. That's really comprehensive, Marcus. I'm assuming here that, as with many regulatory requirements, it's important for an organisation to demonstrate they're complying with the requirements. How can organisations do this and provide that necessary assurance?
Absolutely, Stuart. Yeah, assurance that an ALR is in place and it contains everything should really be essential. If you think about it, an ALR is used to inform decision making, financial planning and reporting. So ensuring it's up to date and contains all the required information is so important. There's no set way of providing assurance. Whilst the board's ultimately accountable, quite often a risk and assurance committee will have delegated responsibility to receive assurance updates and ongoing maintenance of the register. The frequency of the update will be dependent on the nature and the content of the register. Providers will also need to consider how often it's reported to the board, and it should be led and owned by the board. I'd recommend that a report is taken to the board at least half yearly or more frequently if required. Subject to changes. If changes happen throughout the course of the year, you'd want to highlight this to the board. Some organisations offer an independent review and confirmation that the register meets all the requirements. Others do this themselves and demonstrate to the board that it's in place by having a live walkthrough, a high level, of course. At DTP, we are more than happy to provide advice and the most appropriate mechanisms of providing assurance and anything else in relation to ALRs for that matter.
Oh, thanks for that. I think you've summarised all that really well. Now, looking beyond regulation, are there any added value benefits of maintaining an accurate and robust ALR that providers need to be aware of?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's true. Yeah, I definitely think that the purpose behind having an ALR does certainly go beyond regulatory requirements. First and foremost, it just makes good business sense. Not only does assets and liabilities register act as a valuable tool for decision making, risk assessment and strategic planning, it can also help providers to remain agile and able to deal with both new opportunities and any challenges that may occur. Be forewarned is forearmed, as they say. If it's okay, Stuart, I'll just highlight some of the key advantages.
Absolutely, please do.
Okay, so in relation to any potential mergers, a prospective merger partner will want to know about the provider, the stock they own, and manage, and any liabilities associated with them. This will almost certainly form part of any due diligence process that will take place. It can provide easy access to information required for any ESG or net zero carbon funding and can help making decisions at our disposal if needed to. In relation to building safety, a register which is being integrated with other property management tools would allow a provider to identify any properties that require work and plan for accordingly. Also, with regards to securing new funding, providers need to have up-to-date information on all the assets. Having this as part of an ALL means that provider can access timely and accurate information.
And just finally, in drawing all of what we've discussed to a close, can you explain how DTP can provide support and assistance to providers in relation to ALRs?
Now, we don't have one size that fits all approach, Stuart. What we do is we work with a provider to understand their organisation and then agree the support which meets their requirements. For example, we can conduct a full review of the current register, checking whether it contains all the key requirements and it's up to date. And this is particularly useful with providing assurance to stakeholders, be that boards, the regulator, but also funders as well. We can also advise on setting up a register from scratch for new providers, or we can undertake regular validation of a register prior to the report that's then provided to the board, for example. So in other words, another layer of independent assurance, which is really important.
Excellent. Thank you, Marcus, for sharing your expertise and valuable insights today.
Thank you.
And thank you to our listeners for joining us for this podcast. If you'd like to learn more, Marcus's contact details are in the post accompanying this podcast, and please make sure to check out our social media channels for more podcasts in the future. Thank you.